Well, I like to use an outline because my genre is memoir. And I find even though I'm telling my story, that my story tends to ebb and flow and have different parts that kind of resurface. And so it's very helpful to me to keep on track to have an outline to work from.
That is so interesting, Gail, because I don't use an outline for the exact same reasons. I work in memoirs and autobiographical stories, and like you said, my words and my thoughts tend to ebb and flow. But for that reason, maybe you use an outline to keep yourself on track a little bit. But as a humor writer, I prefer not to work off a script per se. That's as a comedian, I'm very improvisational in what I do on stage. And I like to think that that same approach applies to my writing style as well. There's no real right answer. Sometimes I wish I did have an outline, but for me, it just works better as I just sit down and whatever comes out, and then I edit it.
I write in a few different genres. I write short stories, flash fiction, which is an extremely abbreviated version of a short story, personal essays, and novels. And so, depending on the genre in which I'm writing, I may or may not outline. So, with shorter pieces like short fiction and personal essays, I tend not to use an outline. But with two novels to date, outlining has been essential for me in order to keep them from not being a chaotic mess.
Yeah, I do both novels and have done some inspirational books. And interestingly, my novels are outlined, but they start from the back and work their way forward. So my outlines almost start with how do I want the book to end, and then I work my way back to get those like ebbs and flows and kind of what you might say like an act of a play with three interesting, peaks and valleys, if you will. So for my novels, for sure, the inspirational books, I sometimes start with an outline, but it never ends like the outline. So a little bit more like you, Greg, where I come up with an idea in the middle of the night. I'm like, I'm putting that in the book.
Right.
So yeah, the writing styles are different for sort of the different audiences.
I write primarily creative nonfiction, which can be humor. To Greg's point, some of those, those nuances, those moments in a day. And in that respect, I don't use an outline for that simply because I really want the audience to know how my brain is working at that moment. So in that respect, there ain't no outline for that.
Yeah.
Um, I do dabble in fiction and even then I usually start with the seed of an idea versus a plot. And so I will write down dialogue maybe that I think is catchy, something that I think about, or a character explanation. I still start without an outline, and then I will start to put meat to that and flow to that afterwards. But it usually just always starts with a seed for me, and so in that respect, I don't use an outline typically.
How do you know when you're done if you don't have an outline?
That's a great question.
Especially
I
with your brain, David. It keeps going.
Yeah, David, what's your response?
I like that question because at some point in every essay, I'm not sure how it's going to close, but somewhere in the writing of it, something will come to me to say, this is how I'm going to make the connection to close it at the end.
Yeah, yeah. I find that the ending is the toughest. I think just about any author, no matter what genre you write. I mean, when do you decide that you're done? And when you're done, do you feel like, am I really done, or am I just finished because I'm tired and I just don't want to write anymore? I find myself struggling sometimes. To me, writing the last paragraph of either the whole book or just one story in the book takes as long for me as writing the entire essay.
That's
I,
interesting. And Mara, I liked your approach of starting with the end.
yeah,
Mhm.
Uh, I
yeah,
don't know how many people do that or how,
yeah.
off how prevalent that is, but I like that idea. And I think what it does is you have like James Patterson says that he will not write word one of the book until he has the entire book outlined. But then you look at somebody like Stephen King who just starts.
Yeah, Right. No outline. I think probably because the two novels that I've written are based on true stories, and their stories don't end. So you have to pick an ending point to write to, or you would just keep writing along with their life, right?
Mhm.
So that may be what drove me to that. But I do think there's something to be said about understanding where you want a book to go and
That's
to
right.
end. That helps the efficiency of writing to make that decision to finish, if you will, because it's the hardest thing to do. I don't think any of my books are finished, honestly. I think
Mhm.
if I went back and read the first one, I would be like, oh, I'm going to change things. And honestly, have done that where I've done a second version and made some changes to my first book. So yeah, it's tough to finalize and to finish and put it down.
So if you are talking to an aspiring writer or an aspiring author, what is your advice as to whether to use an outline or not?
With newer writers, I think it depends on where they are at a particular moment. So some new writers may already have a fairly defined project in mind, in which case I would certainly recommend outlining. But some new writers are just frozen and just need to get started and don't have a definitive vision. So I do think that the value of just free writing with no structure, no pressure, is really essential just to get things moving and get juices flowing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And I think part of it, when you mention new writers, I think a lot of new writers, just the fact that they have decided to write is a huge step. The fact that they have decided to put words down on paper or on a computer or whatever. And I think that they shouldn't be, I don't think you should get caught up maybe in the nuances I'll give you a great example. I don't know why this came to me, but a friend of mine, he was writing his memoir at the urging of his therapist, who said you should just put your thoughts down, okay? Which I think a lot of therapists probably recommend to people. And he was basically journaling. You know, it was kind of like I've had three fortunes and lost them and gained them back and that kind of thing. And the more he wrote, he said. He thought there might be something for a book here. He said, "Would you look at this?" And I looked at it, and yes, what he had written was good, but it was kind of throwing up on paper. Okay. It was just whatever came to him came out. And I said, I think you've got something here. Now, now we got to structure this. Now we
Yeah.
got to figure out what goes
Yeah.
where and why. And we have to make it so it doesn't look like you just woke up in the middle of the night and wrote for 6 hours and then
Yeah.
went back to sleep and now you feel better.
Mhm.
Right. Right.
And that's an interesting thing too, because I've worked with some writers where, you know, I'll always say they want me to look at their stuff, maybe edit their stuff, and I'll say, don't look at the red that's on the paper or that's on the document, because what we're trying to do is tighten it, bring it together as writing that people want to read and to help not change your voice, but to create a voice for you. So sometimes I've edited stuff for people where I'll say, okay, I track the changes in one document, but please read the clean one first. And look at it. And if what I've done is in line and you're accepting of that, then if there are certain things that you say, oh, I don't know if I agree with that, go back to the track changes document, because if you go back to that track document, you're just going to be discouraged,
Or defensive.
or defensive, right? And
Yeah.
that's the other thing. This is such a personal thing for all of us. It's really hard to shed that. Well, what are you talking about, Greg? I just wrote 100 pages of stuff, and now you're telling me that this is a good start?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Or
Right.
you're questioning what I wrote, or you're questioning,
Yeah.
do you know how difficult it was for me to bare my soul?
Hmm.
And you're questioning that now.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not how it should be interpreted, but I understand
Hmm.
that's sort of an initial reaction. I would probably make it too.
Yeah.
Well, I
I
think
have, yeah.
as writers, we have to um, determine even before we put those first words down, what the goal is. If you're looking to just bare your soul and get stuff off your chest just because it's a therapeutic tool, that's wonderful. But if you really are hoping that someone will read your work or learn something from your experience that you've written about in your work, then I think you owe it to yourself as the writer to take that step back, or to get somebody like David or Greg or Marlene or Megan, to another writer, to take a look at it and say, well, there's some good stuff here, but maybe you should consider doing X, Y, and Z. That's what an editor does, and that's such a valuable contribution that they make.
I completely agree. I think that if you know what you're doing, if you know why you're writing what you're writing, and you know that it's just for you, then it's just for you. But when you make a decision to try to take that piece and turn it from an inward facing position to an outward facing position that's meant to be received by other people, that step necessarily should open you up to the feedback of experienced editors who understand an audience and how they want to read and what they want to read, and just opening yourself up to that feedback and criticism, which is difficult, but it truly is, I would say, essential. And it's the difference between a person who writes for themselves as a hobby and a tool, and a person who writes for a larger audience.
When we talk about outlining, for those of us that outline, do you ever think it would behoove a writer to give the outline to the editor before you start really crafting the chapters?
No, I don't, because I think then the editor is going to jump in with suggestions before the writer has started. I think an editor's job is to give suggestions after he or she sees the finished product, or the product that's almost done, not before it starts.
Yeah.
I always look at it in terms of music, and don't ask me why, because I'm not a professional musician. But in, the analogous situation is you've got the songwriter or the writer, the author, and then you have the editor or editors who are like the record producers. So they are in the studio as you're mixing, and they are saying, "We need a little tambourine here. Let's put some harmony here." They are plussing your work, but to Greg's point, they're not changing the song.
Right.
And they're not coming in right off going, "I don't think I like this." That's for other people to determine. Like Megan said, is it audience ready? It's so important to have allies that can look at your stuff from the audience's perspective. And that's not just a sister who reads, or an uncle who reads. They're not gonna give you objective input. It's somebody who can really go, audiences like this kind of stuff, or yeah, this, you're not writing to an audience.
I think on that note, David, that it's important for writers to have different kinds of writing communities. So for myself, I have certain communities, just friends that I've met through this writing process, who we really are there to bolster one another. It really, truly is a friendship-driven community. It's very much just about mutual support. And it does not have a critical element to it. And I also have other communities, and an editor whose sole purpose is to find the holes in my work and point them out to me. And I find that having both kinds of communities has really helped a lot, because on one hand, I can get out of bed in the morning because I have these wonderful people around me who are just very supportive.
Yeah.
And I also have people who want to help me make my work better, who are not there just to hold my hand.
One of the things that I find helps me with outlining is that it frees me up to be more creative, which seems almost like counterintuitive, but it allows me to know that there's certain things that I want to make sure that I say, that I talk about within the piece that I'm writing, and I get that in the outline. But then I can go back and think about, well, how about the use of dialogue? I wonder if that wouldn't make a really good addition to this particular part of the story that I'm telling. Or what about using a flashback here, or imagery, any of those kind of writers' tools that you can have it. But if at least have the outline there, at least for me, that frees me up to then go back and consider, oh, what about adding a little bit of spice to the story here by adding some of these elements that make it more interesting for a reader, hopefully, to read.
Gail, I cannot agree with you more because once that gets out of my head and I know the points I have to hit, then I can start thinking about other things. Otherwise, I'm worried I'm going to miss something and I'm not as free. And that's a really, really good point. I like that. That's great.
Yeah, that is a good point. And go back to what Greg said is, um, especially for somebody who's just starting out, is don't worry, do it whatever way you want. The idea is right now is in the doing of it, right? It's
Yeah,
it's
Right.
it's taking that first step, and that's sometimes the
right.
hardest part. Don't worry about the audience, don't worry about form, don't worry about anything, and then you'll determine kind of what your avenue is, what your best approach is to how you're going to write what you write.